Welcome back to the History of the Papacy podcast, a podcast about the popes of Rome and Christian Church. Prepare yourself to step behind the ropes and leave the official tour of the story of the popes and Christianity. I am your host, Steve Guerra, and I thank you for joining me on this journey. The Lord said to Moses, "Tell the Israelites to bring me an offering. You are to receive the offerings from me from everyone whose heart prompts them to give. These are the offerings you are to receive from them: gold, silver, and bronze, blue, purple, and scarlet yarn and fine linen, goat hair, ram skins dyed red, and other types of durable leather, acacia wood, olive oil for the light, spices for the anointing oil and for the fragrant incense, and onyx stones and other gems to be mounted on the ephod and breastpiece. Then have them make a sanctuary for me, and I will dwell among them. Make this tabernacle and all its furnishings exactly like the pattern I will show you." The book of Exodus, chapter 25. And boy, did God tell them the exact layout he was looking for. In today's episode, we are going to talk about the precursor to the great Solomon's Temple, the first temple of Jerusalem. The tabernacle is more than just an archaic version of the temple or a simple first draft. The tabernacle is its own thing. It represents a major moment in the history or the historicity of the Israelite people. It represents the past of the people and their present. It represents the move of being a semi-nomadic pastoralist people to a great ancient kingdom. Our goal today will be to see what the tabernacle was, why it was so important for the early Israelites, and try and see what its place was in the creation of the Israelite to Jewish identity. That's a tall order, so let's get into it. The tabernacle, or in Hebrew, the Mishkan, was the dwelling place of God while the Israelites were on the move from Egypt in the early days of their settlement of the land of Canaan, at least according to the Bible. The tabernacle, at its most basic description, was a mobile tent temple, but it was no simple tent. This was the glamping of biblical proportions. When we think about the book of Exodus from the Old Testament, we think of the story of Moses coming up from a child in Egypt, connecting back to his Hebrew roots in the desert, freeing the 12 tribes of Israel from their 400-ish years of bondage, then taking them on an epic 40-year trip through the desert to get to the land promised to them by their God. The trip is complete with forming an agreement with God and receiving their mission statement through the 10 Commandments. Those events take about a little bit over the first half of the book of Exodus. The rest of the book is all about the tabernacle and establishing the processes and procedures for how to be an Israelite. So you see a major reformation of a religion that's kind of loosey-goosey, you might say, before Exodus, in the Genesis time period, where you don't really get a real read on what the religion is. And it's kind of confused in a way with what was up with what Abraham was doing. We see things with, say, Abraham, just for example, that aren't kosher. They're literally not kosher. He's cooking a kid with its milk. Like, it's in the Bible that he did that. So we're seeing a major change in the religion here. And what does that exactly mean? Every single detail you could possibly think of on how to construct a structure, in this case, a temporary movable structure, is detailed in the last 15 or so chapters of the 40-chapter book of Exodus. In the rest of the Pentateuch, or the first 5 books of the Old Testament, also known as the Torah, we get more of the story of Moses and the tabernacle. We get tabernacle talk in Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy. The tabernacle is the direct predecessor and model for the Temple of Solomon, but also took on a significant theological and metaphorical importance in the early Israelite religion, Second Temple Judaism, Rabbinical Judaism, and, of course, Christianity. So why a tent is a good question. Just the name tabernacle itself complicates things. English translations of the Bible always have what you might call a mystical factor. Certain words are left untranslated from the source language, and because people don't realize the words represent a simple term, the words take on an almost magical connotation. Some examples of that are a psalm, which a psalm in Greek just means a piece of music played by a plucked instrument or a stringed instrument. Exodus just means leaving on a road or hitting the road, you might say. Wouldn't that be different if the Bible in English translations called Exodus hitting the road? Genesis just means beginning. And there's so many words that are fairly simple, straightforward terms in their original language. They don't get translated, and then they take on that mystical meaning in English because they're not an everyday word that we use. So tabernacle is another. Tabernacle is a word that means tent, and that's all. Tabernacle. So the tabernacle with an uppercase T is the tent of meeting. And this is where we get into the push and pull of scholarly debate. So one question is how to approach the Old Testament stories, and particularly the Exodus from Egypt. Should the Bible be taken at face value as reporting of actual events? Is the account of Exodus a metaphor or an allegory written or redacted much later to fit the narrative required of that later time? So in that spectrum of a reliable depiction of a historical event to pure fiction that was needed for certain post-dated political requirements is really the debate over the entire Bible from Old to New Testament. The other questions for exploration are what cultures did ancient Israel most interact with and were influenced by? The Egyptians, the Babylonians, or the Northwest Semitic groups? We have to ask ourselves all of those questions and much more when we're looking at these stories from the Bible. Hey, Steve here. If you're enjoying the History of the Papacy podcast, consider joining us on Patreon at patreon.com/History of the Papacy. We're working toward going completely listener funded, which means no more ads ever. When you join, you get early access to episodes, monthly book giveaways, and most importantly, your name is added to the History of the Papacy diptychs, our own list of commemorated supporters. You can become an Antioch level supporter for just $3 per month, but it makes a huge difference to making the History of the Papacy ad-free and independent. Nobody likes ads, not you, not me, and I'm the guy who records them. So let's just get rid of them. Visit patreon.com/History of the Papacy and join today. Another thing to consider is there, and what would the historical kernel be in these stories, and then what is added on to them? Lots of questions. So the big problem with trying to study a tent by its nature is a tent is not permanent. That makes archaeology very difficult to nigh on impossible. Now, there could be some indirect evidence for a tent, sacred spaces, but we don't have any direct evidence of the Israelite tabernacle. That means that texts have to be the primary source of evidence. According to the book of Exodus, the Hebrews or Israelites were a people on the move. Despite being in bondage in Egypt for 400 odd years since the time of Joseph, when he welcomed his dad, Israel, and his brothers, the sons of Israel, into Egypt to escape great famine. Genesis ends with everyone living happily ever after. Cut. Next page. Exodus begins with the sons of Israel struck low in slavery. Just the worst you could imagine. So that's a jarring cut in the Bible, jarring editing. No real transition, you might say, from awesome to really bad. I won't rehash the whole story of Exodus. Most people know it in broad strokes, and in the broad strokes, that's really enough. But recall that Moses was forced to leave Egypt. He crossed the Sinai wilderness, across the Red Sea, in no particular order, and then ended up in Midian. In Midian, Moses worked his way into the Midianite culture. He started to work for a local leader named either Reuel or Jethro and married his daughter Zipporah. Midian is important and intriguing for a few reasons. Midian is in the northeastern section of the Arabian Peninsula, at least two lands, you might say, south of the land of the Israelites proper. You have Moab and then Edom in between, and some other territories along the way. So you've got to go through at least two different people to go from the southern Israelites to get to the Midianites. So that raises some questions in your mind. The people of Midian are sons of Abraham, but they aren't Israelites. They aren't sons of Ishmael either. They are a related people to the Israelites, but their own things. They are clearly nomadic pastoralists, and for 40 years, Moses lived his best life in Midian until he encountered God Most High on his holy mountain, but not in the land of Israel or Canaan. God told Moses he had to set his people free from the situation in Israel. It's also really interesting that just take the two names that we mentioned of Midianites, Reuel and Zipporah. We get both of those deistic name endings, the El in Reuel, which means God. And then you also get the Yah ending in Zipporah. So was that actually their names or a translation from Midianite language into Israelite? That again raises a lot of questions of this common religion idea that was floating around in the Levant, from all the way the bottom of Levant, which you could even say that Midian was not in the Levant, all the way up through into Syria, northern Syria, southern Turkey. So going back to Moses, cutscene, after Moses arranged for the freedom of the Israelites, they had to book it out of Egypt. He went from the mountain to Egypt. We get the stories. So we have at least 3 layers of people on the move. Traditionally, the Israelites, when they were in Canaan, were a semi-nomadic pastoralist people. We can see that in the story of Joseph. They were moving their camp all around the land of Canaan to follow their flocks. It's all about flocks. We also get some agrarian discussion in there with the sheaves of wheat and stuff like that, but it shows a very specific section of time where they're definitely leaning more towards semi-pastoralists where they have to move their flocks, but probably from a base camp where they did do a certain amount of agriculture. That's a definite Bronze Age kind of situation. Moses adopts a semi-nomadic pastoralist lifestyle through the Midianites. Once they're free, these now bondageless, unbonded Israelites who are free from Egypt, they don't have a home. They have to get out of Dodge, so to speak, and get to the promised land. Oh, wait, that 300-kilometer trip is going to take 40 years. The Israelites are on the move. Steve here with a quick word from our sponsors. A life on the move. This is where the tabernacle comes into the story. The Israelites have a 40-year trip of them. Is the 40 years in the desert literal? We have to ask ourselves. Were they actually wandering through the desert for 40 years on a trip that should have generously taken a few weeks to maybe a few months? We have to take into account if you were just a single person and you needed to get from, let's say, central Egypt to, let's say, just say Jerusalem, you could do that in a couple of days to a week. It would take some travel down the Nile. That would take some time. The shortest part of the trip would actually be getting from the Egyptian coast to the Judean coast on a boat. That wouldn't take very long. And then probably the longest part of your trip would be actually be traveling over land from the coast to Jerusalem, because you have to go down into some valleys and then up into hilly country. A week. Now, if you're moving an entire people on a mass, leaving out a mass hitting of the road in an exodus, that's going to take a couple of weeks, maybe even a couple of months to get all that organized and get those people. It's still not that big of a trip. So that leads us to really think about, is the 40 years metaphorical? The Israelites have to go through a purgation of sorts in order to settle the land that God has promised them. They also have to establish the norms and institutions of a people before they can settle. That's laid out for us. This 40 years could very well represent a cultural memory of a people transitioning from semi-nomadic pastoralism to a sedentary agriculturalist society. Think about Israel and his kids, pretty much pastoralists with some agriculture, into a society that's really focused on agriculture after that. It's even possible that the Exodus story is a redacted re-imaging of the Israelites' return to the southern Levant after the Babylonian exile. We discussed that with Gil Kedron of the podcast of Biblical Proportions, and that sure sounds reasonable to me. While in the desert, God gives Moses the plans for a temple, a mobile temple, where he can be worshipped. The Israelites are nomadic at this time, so they can't build a fixed temple. They are ordered or directed, you might say, or told to build a very specific structure. And God gives them the plans on how to build the mobile tent of meeting and instructions on how to worship there. And this is no Coleman tent. The tabernacle would be a lavish tent fit for the greatest of any Midianite sheikh or chieftain. So was the idea of the tabernacle tent of meeting inspired by the often extremely elaborate tents of desert nomads? In the archaeological record, we also see contemporary, elaborate, extremely well-designed and crafted Egyptian tents that were fashioned to be very easily disassembled and moved. Probably, honestly, easier than your Coleman tent with those sticks that never fold together correctly and then they break. These Egyptian tents were basically mortised and jointed in a way so that you just pop them apart and they could be very easily taken down and then put back together. So who were the influences and the influencers for all of this? This is the issue that I've struggled with. I spend way too much time thinking about this topic and what was the main influence on these early Israelites. There were so many opinions on where they came from, how they developed and evolved into the religion, culture, and language that we know of through the Bible. Israel, the land of Samaria and Judah, and the southern Levant in antiquity was more than just a crossroads. It was definitely a crossroads, but it's like an uber crossroads, a crossroads of the world. So many civilizations connected and clashed through this area, diverse cultures and civilizations on top of that. You have Egyptian civilization to the southeast, Arabian cultures to the southwest. These cultures connected deep into the Arabian Peninsula to points as far away as India and even China. You have the northwestern Semitic cultures to the northwest, Indo-European and European farmer cultures to the north and to the west, then the great civilizations of Babylon and Persia to the east, completely surrounded by great cultures. I think you can see how when you start to think that one culture was the main influence for one aspect of the Israelite culture, you can see how another culture may have been that influence as well. Then you have the internal culture of Israel itself. Israel was a unique people, and in and of itself, it developed really unique ideas of their own. We are dealing with the culture with a strong sense of self, surrounded by highly influential cultures and civilizations. The Israelites were getting influenced, and they were influencers as well. So this gets really complicated, not just for us, but for the scholars as well. Now we get to the next step, the Promised Land. The Tabernacle was the Israelites' place of worship wherever they traveled during their 40 years in the desert. After the narrative portion of Exodus, the Israelite people moved into the land of Canaan. Next stop, the Promised Land. The Tabernacle was the Israelites' place of worship whenever they traveled during the 40 years in the desert. After the narrative in Exodus, the Israelite people moved into the land of Canaan. Presumably, the Israelites were coming home, right? The biblical source for most of this narrative is the book of Joshua. 400 years is a long time to be out of the picture, so the Israelites would have to fight it out with the established Canaanite kingdoms. A way to kind of think about that is, if somebody, a Native American group, migrated or was in some way taken out of the land, their land somewhere in North America, in the early 1600s, maybe a whole tribe was relocated and taken into bondage, and they were kept as they were able to keep their tribal identity when they were taken back to Spain or England or whatever. Then in 2024, 2025 or whatever, they come back to North America. They're going to see a very, very different situation than what they left in 1600. It's going to be unrecognizable to them. And if they're a warrior population, they've got to hit the scene and they've got to be ready to start fighting to get their land back, because people are going to say, like, who are you? What are you doing here? Oh, you have some claim to the land because supposedly you were here 400 years ago. Where is it? Where did you live? I lived here. My people have been living here for 400 years. Whatever. You can see whatever you think about their right to that land or the claims that they would have to that land or how unfair it was of what that group did to them. Nobody's going to necessarily just lay down and give them that land back without a fight. That's the situation the Israelites found themselves in, at least according to the book of Joshua. Eventually, the Israelites established themselves in the land of Canaan and made a permanent encampment in the town of Shiloh. probably Shiloh, more likely, but we'll go with Shiloh. That is where the tabernacle was set up on a permanent basis. The Israelites got into a number of scrapes with the neighboring Philistines. In a famous battle in the Bible, the Israelites brought forth the Ark of the Covenant. Don't worry about the Ark of the Covenant. We'll get into that in just a moment, to win an important victory. That doesn't work out, and the Philistines took the ark. Later on, the Philistines marched into Shiloh and wrecked the place. The tabernacle is said to have been destroyed at that point. Others say that the tabernacle was replaced essentially with the Tabernacle 2.0. Scholars back in the 1800s tried to find the location of where the tabernacle was in the place that they thought they identified in Shiloh. So you want to talk about speculations and conjectures and what ifs. Read about the scholars trying to interpret a hillside that was prepped to be a permanent place for the tabernacle. This is based on an interpretation of the dimensions from the Bible, in which the units of measure have to be interpreted, and then later observations made by people who supposedly saw the tabernacle on site, and then their interpretations need to be interpreted. We're talking about speculations piled on top of speculations, piled on top of interpretation. We could write off all these speculations if they were done by Indiana Jones style archaeologists of the 1800s who just wanted to prove everything in the Bible and then maybe get some gold as a side benefit. But modern scholars do this as well, and they make careers out of building these speculations and then fighting other scholars over all of their speculations. I think it's safe to say there is likely nothing left of the tabernacle, and finding the precise site of where the tabernacle stood would be very difficult to determine with any exactness. Looking for tent posts. How do you know they're tent posts? Maybe they're in a rectangular formation, but maybe it's just a tent. Who knows? Maybe it was rectangular because it was a pasture that was marked off with fencing. I'm not an archaeologist, and I'm sure I know the archaeologists have a lot more ideas to build their speculations upon. But boy, that is, to me, as an outsider looking in, that is pure speculation built on very shaky ground. One way or the other, the tabernacle just doesn't exist or survive in any way, shape, or form to this day that we know of. Be that as it may, we have highly detailed descriptions of what the tabernacle looked like and what it contained. The tabernacle was laid out in how we would expect an ancient temple to be designed: an outer courtyard, an inner courtyard, a sanctuary or a holy place, and then the Holy of the Holies held something called the Ark of the Covenant, or a place where legal tablets would have been held. So we talked about the Ark. Let's take a quick little detour and talk about the Ark of the Covenant. Ark is a word that's used quite frequently in the Bible. Noah's Ark, the crib that was floated down the Nile holding the baby Moses, was called an ark, the Ark of the Covenant, of course. And then the Virgin Mary's womb is referred to as the Ark of the New Covenant. The word ark itself is from a Latin word which means chest or box. The Hebrew word is tivah, which is connected to the story of the Epic of Gilgamesh, meaning something closer to boat. So the Latin translation, which would have come from the Greek, gives more of an idea of a holding device. The Hebrew version, more of a boat device. I personally think that ark, from arka or chest, strongbox, is a better term in my own opinion. All arks hold something precious or dear, but not all arks are boats. Moses' floating crib and Noah's Ark floated on the water, but they didn't have their own motive power on the water, which to me would be the big difference between a boat and just something floating down the waterway. A boat has motive power, a sail, a propeller, something that makes oars or something that makes it go. An ark is just purely a device for holding things. The thing that connects all of those terms together is that they did hold something. In Moses's ark case, the ark held the infant Moses who would save his people from 400 years of bondage. Noah's ark held the remnants of God's creation to be rebuilt after the deluge. For Christians, Mary's womb as an ark held God-man, Jesus Christ. The Ark of the Covenant held just that, the covenant, the everlasting binding contract between Yahweh and his people. Of all the biblical arks or chests, the Ark of the Covenant was the most chest-like. Want to know about the Ark of the Covenant look like? Don't rely on me for a description. Moses recorded God's exact instructions on how to build a proper Ark of the Covenant. And this is from Exodus chapter 25, verses 10 to 22. And they shall make an ark of acacia wood. 2.5 cubits shall be its length, 1.5 cubits its width, and 1.5 cubits its height. And you shall overlay it with pure gold. Inside and out you shall overlay it, and shall make on it a molding of gold all around. You shall cast 4 rings of gold for it, and put them in its 4 corners. 2 rings shall be on one side, and 2 rings on the other side. And you shall make poles of acacia wood, and overlay them with gold. And you shall put the poles into the rings on the side of the ark, and the ark may be carried by them. The pole shall be in the rings of the ark, they shall not be taken from it. And you shall put into the ark of the covenant, which I will give you. You shall make a mercy seat of pure gold. 2.5 cubits shall be its length, and 1.5 cubits its width. And you shall make 2 cherubim of gold. Of hammered work you shall make them at 2 ends of the mercy seat. Make 1 cherub at one end, and the other cherub at the other end. You shall make the cherubim at the 2 ends of it, one piece with the mercy seat. And the cherubim shall stretch out their wings above, covering the mercy seat with their wings, and they shall face one another. The faces of the cherubim shall be toward the mercy seat. You shall put the mercy seat on top of the ark, and the ark you shall put the covenant that I will give you, and there I will meet with you, and I will speak with you from above the mercy seat, from between the 2 cherubim which are on the Ark of the Covenant, about everything which I will give you in commandment to the children of Israel. You can see the directions are quite specific. And this is the place where God is going to personally hang out forever and ever. That's his seat, the mercy seat on top of the Ark of the Covenant that will hold these precious, most important documents you can imagine, the covenant that God's going to make with the people. Now we can talk about some measurements here because we've gotten a precise instructions on how to make the mercy seat, but the dimensions are a little iffy. A cubit was traditionally the length of the middle finger to the elbow of a man. That's a pretty convenient measure, just like palms, feet, spans, etc. Believe it or not, I'm sure you know it, they didn't have standardized measurements back then. A particular culture may have had standardization for each of these measurements, spans, feet, hands, cubits, but there wasn't a universal standard. With that, a cubit was in the average range of 18 inches or about half a meter, but it could be larger or smaller. Again, with that in mind, the ark would have been around 4 feet long or 120-ish centimeters. Not that small, but not that big either. Very portable. The ark stayed with the tabernacle and was placed in the Holy of the Holies, or the most sacred space, of course, because God's going to sit there. As a storage bin, the Ark held a few key items, including, most importantly, the tablets of the Ten Commandments. There are so many threads we could chase with the Ten Commandments, but in short, the Ten Commandments marked the covenant or pact or contract between God and his people. The Ten Commandments weren't the only part of the deal, but they were a physical representation of the covenant. We saw a few episodes ago that it was common for peoples of that time and place to keep law documents in the sanctuary of their temples. That's a logical place to keep such documents. The laws gave the king legitimacy, and that legitimacy was connected into the holy or sacred way and then connected to the deities. That's huge. That connects everything in society together. The ark went to Shiloh with the tabernacle and was stolen by the Philistines, according to the Bible. Eventually, the Israelites got it back. The ark was housed in the Holy of Holies of Solomon's temple, where it was pivotal in the Yom Kippur holiday, the most important of the temple holidays in the Israelite religion. So what happened to the Ark of the Covenant post-destruction of the second temple? Because there's evidence to show it in the second temple. That's a great question, you might ask, Steve. There are, and probably people out there, many people are asking the same question. Steve here with a quick word from our sponsors. So there are so many great stories and theories, but not a ton of direct evidence. There's some evidence to say it was in the second temple, but one thing against that, it wasn't represented in the Arch of Titus, which after the second temple was destroyed, Titus, the Emperor Titus, made a arch in Rome that depicted the destruction of the temple, all carved out, and many important artifacts were represented in that arch carvings of those particular items that were brought back to Rome. So we could, in a way, sort of infer that that's a list of items that they wanted to document. But there's no Ark of the Covenant in there. There's the candelabra, there's other things, but the Ark of the Covenant's not on there. And you'd think something solid gold item like that would be included, but it's not. There are a few theories, I dare say, conspiracy theories that say the Ark is still somewhere in Rome. Others place it in a monastery in Ethiopia. Some say it was discovered by the Knights Templar when their order was destroyed. And when their order was destroyed, the Ark went to France or Scotland, and then maybe even wound up in the United States. Maybe according to Indiana Jones, it's in a massive warehouse somewhere. Who knows? If I had to venture a guess, I would say that it never made it out of the destruction of the Temple of Solomon. And if that story in the Bible of the Philistines taking it is accurate, it may have never even made it out of that kidnapping situation, Grand Theft Ark situation. If we go back to the description, the box was literally worth its weight in gold. Something like that isn't going to just make it through too many lootings. But let's get back to the tent that housed the ark, the tent of meeting. What did the tabernacle look like, and what was it all about? So in Exodus chapter 25, verse 8, God tells Moses to make the tabernacle, but before he gets into the details, and there will be details, he details 3 key items that need to be in the sanctuary of the tabernacle: the Ark of the Covenant, as we've discussed, the table or altar and the vessels for that altar, and then a lampstand. And this is the model for the classic lampstand we hear all about in the Hanukkah story, and that we see represented in the Arch of Titus. So Exodus chapter 26 is where we get into what God envisioned for his tent. Make the tabernacle with 10 curtains of finely twisted linen and blue, purple, and scarlet yarns, with cherubim woven into them by a skilled worker. All the curtains are to be the same size, 28 cubits long and 4 cubits wide. Joined 5 of the curtains together and do the same with the other 5. Make loops of blue material along the edge of the end of the curtain in one set, and do the same with the end curtain in the other set. Make 50 loops on one curtain and 50 loops on the end curtain of the other set, with the loops opposite each other. Then make 50 gold clasps and use them to fasten the curtains together so that the tabernacle is a unit. This is just a few lines of what goes on and on and on in the text. How to construct or create every aspect of the tabernacle is detailed, including methods and materials. Then the next few chapters explain with some specificity how to make the garments for the priest, how to consecrate a priest, how to conduct the sacrifices in the tabernacle, and how to upkeep and maintain the tabernacle. Then we get to Exodus 31, verses 1 through 11. God even says specifically who he wants working on the temple project and who he wants to project manage the whole operation. The Lord spoke to Moses, saying, "See, I have called by name Bezalel, the son of Uri, the son of Hur, of the tribe of Judah. And I have filled him with the Spirit of God and wisdom and understanding and knowledge and of all manner of workmanship, to design artistic works, to work in gold, in silver, in bronze, and cutting jewels for setting, in carving wood, and to work all manners of workmanship. And I, indeed I, have appointed with him Aholiab, the son of Ahishamach, of the tribe of Dan, and I have put wisdom in their hearts of all the gifted artisans, that they may make all I have commanded to you. The tabernacle of meeting, the ark of the covenant, and the mercy seat that is on it, and all the furniture of the tabernacle and its utensils, the pure gold lampstand with all its utensils, the altar of incense, the altar of burnt offerings, with all its utensils, and the laver and its base, the garments of ministry, the holy garments of Aaron, the priest, and the garments of his sons to minister as priests, and the anointing oil and sweet incense for the holy place, according to all that I have commanded you, they shall do." Moses is the project manager, and then you have these two craftsmen who are going to actually whip it all together. And I had just this speculation thinking right now, it's kind of interesting that God would pick somebody from the tribe of Judah and then somebody from the tribe of Dan when eventually the Israelites would settle into the Holy Land. Judah would have been the extreme southern tribe, and then Dan, if I'm not mistaken, was the most northern of the tribes. So maybe they're trying to capture an A to Z, an Alpha and Omega. The two most distant tribes are the ones who whip this whole thing together. In the end, we see that the tabernacle is more than just a tent for a religious revival. The Hebrews, or Israelites if you prefer, at least as the way they were depicted in Exodus, were people on the move. They were nomadic, but then they tapped into the nomadic lifestyle of not cheaping out on their accommodations, as we have seen with other nomadic people. They went all in on their tents. I think the bigger point is that the Israelites were creating the prototype for a temple for their tribe or nation. There's nothing different about the depiction of this tent than what would go into a proper temple, except for the permanency. Sure, a fixed temple would be made out of stone or wood, but the movable nature of the tabernacle didn't make any of the quality suffer. The very best materials that could be procured were used: gold, beautiful high-end wood, high-status fabrics, perfectly cut and polished jewels, top-of-the-line craftsmanship. The tabernacle could very well represent either actual or metaphorically the process of the Israelites evolving from worshiping in simple altars spread all throughout the land of Canaan to a proper temple-based worship. The Israelites are simple Canaanite pastoralists and early agriculturalists. They are the real deal, ready to be a part of ancient society by building a temple. They have the interest in building monumental architecture and the wealth that building and that sort of architecture shows a society has. The real end of this story of the tabernacle is that when Jerusalem was conquered and became the capital city, you might say, of the United Kingdom of Israel, everything changed for the Israelites. This is the point where the Israelites were a fully sedentary people that now needed sedentary institutions like a real national temple. King David danced and strutted his way into the city with the Ark of the Covenant, but it would be during the reign of his son Solomon, the last king of United Israel, to build the temple on the template of the tabernacle. But that will be the story of an upcoming episode. Thank you very much for listening. If you've gotten this far into the story and you're interested in helping out the podcast just a little bit more, Patreon is a great way to do it. But I'm also now on the site Buy Me a Coffee. And if you go to Buy Me a Coffee and search for Stephen Guerra or the History of the Papacy or A to Z History page, or just look in the show notes, there will be a link to how you can buy me a coffee. With that, I will talk to you next time.
The Historical Jesus Podcast is the sweeping saga of the life and times of Galilean Jesus of Nazareth, as well as the faith, religion, and church founded to honor and disseminate his acts and teachings. Join me, Mark Vinette, on this fascinating journey through time, exploring the many great works of Christian theology, literature, architecture, music, and art inspired by the words and deeds of Jesus Christ.